In this episode, I will show you how to brew homemade beer without any special equipment, using only what is available in almost any kitchen. Let's get brewing. Intro: today, we will brew an amber ale in a 20-liter pot. I filled it with 17 liters of water. Why use a pot? It's simple. Not everyone has a home brewery, but almost every kitchen has a pot. For this, we will need a minimal set of tools. The most essential is an electronic thermometer, which we will use to measure the wort temperature and thus go through the temperature rests. Besides measuring the temperature, we will need to grind the malt. Ideally, a special mill is used for this, but you can also use a regular blender or buy pre-ground malt from the store. For brewing the beer, I will need 2 kilograms of Vienna Malt, 1 kilogram of wheat malt, and 400 grams of Melanoidin Malt. For hops, I will use Spalter Select with an alpha acid of 6%, in the amount of 50 grams. The yeast will be 11 grams of MANGROVE JACK'S top fermenting yeast for ales. We will use a 5-step mash, 55 degrees Celsius to 20 minutes, 63 degrees Celsius to 20 minutes, 67 degrees Celsius to 40 minutes, 72 degrees Celsius to 20 minutes, 78 degrees Celsius to 5 minutes. We will also use 17 liters of mash water and 5 liters of sparge water. I ground the required amount of malt. To brew the beer, we will also need kitchen scales to measure the necessary amount of hops and yeast. Additionally, we need a fermentation vessel in which the brewed beer will ferment and a puddle to stir the wort. The temperature in the pot has risen to 53 degrees Celsius. I will start adding the malt now. I added all the malt. We have reached the first temperature rest at 55 degrees Celsius. I turn off the heat and leave it for 20 minutes. During this time, I will stir and monitor the temperature. If necessary, I will heat the wort. The first rest is over. I turned on the heat, waiting for the wort to heat up to 63 degrees Celsius. Heated to 63 degrees. Now I will brew for 20 minutes using the same method. Completed all temperature rests. Turned off the heat. Now I will transfer the wort to an intermediate container. I will filter it and then return it to the pot for boiling. To filter, I will use an ordinary kitchen sieve. As the malt accumulates in the sieve, I will rinse it with hot water. Filtered the wort. The volume is about 17 liters. Transferred the wort back to the pot. Turned on the heat. Will boil for 60 minutes. While the wort is heating up, I will measure the necessary amount of hops for the first addition. I will add the hops in 3 stages. At the beginning of the boil, 20 minutes before the end of the boil, and 5 minutes before the end of the boil. Weighed 10 grams of hops for the first addition. While the wort is boiling, I will prepare the fermentation vessel. For disinfection, I use a peracetic acid solution. Added the first part of the hops. Preparing the second 20 grams of hops for the second addition. In the meantime, I will rehydrate 11 grams of yeast in a glass. These yeast can ferment beer at temperatures up to 28 degrees Celsius. Added the second part of the hops. Weighing the last 20 grams of hops for the third addition. 15 minutes have passed. Added the last hops. Only 5 minutes left to boil. Decided to cool the beer without using a chiller. We'll use improvised means, namely the shower in the bathroom. After 25 minutes, I managed to cool the wort by pouring cold water over the pot. Transferred the beer to the fermentation tank. The volume is about 15 liters. The rest evaporated. Added the yeast. Now I will tightly close the lid of the fermentation tank and take it to a dark place for 7 days to ferment. We'll carbonate the future beer with coater to minimize sediment in the bottles. If you are carbonating with priming sugar, you need to save 10% of the total wort volume in a bottle and refrigerate it before adding the yeast. This will be used for carbonation later. 2 days have passed since we brewed the beer. Now it's in the active fermentation phase. The airlock is bubbling. 7 days have passed since brewing the beer. Now I will transfer it to a keg and carbonate it. The beer is running quite clear. We'll carbonate at 1/8 atm pressure. Carbonated the beer. Time for tasting. The beer turned out amber in color. The taste is predominantly bitter with a pronounced malty aroma and citrus notes. Overall, it turned out well. That's all. See you soon.